Hey everyone, back again with another video, and today I'm going to pick up on a series that I've kind of left alone for a while, and the topic is one of the very common complaints that I've seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Over the years, and especially during the previous few years. So, the topic I'm going to focus on today is what I call the value problem, and what I mean is that the issue is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards have retained very little value over the years, and they don't really retain much value in the modern day. And this in part has to do with the issue that they have a very limited amount of time where they're worth a significant value. And I'll go into more detail about the reasons why I think this is the case, and I'll also talk about how I think we could potentially fix this issue. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So if you've been in the Yu-Gi-Oh scene for a while, you know that Neo cards usually have a lot of immediate value in terms of price and meta relevancy. This primarily has to do with the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very tied to the ban list in general, especially in terms of card value and prices. And what happens is that cards are generally hyped up upon their reveal in the new sets, which informs the general Yu-Gi-Oh! Audience about which cards are going to be the most relevant and competitive in the foreseeable Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta. And the most meta-relevant cards are going to be the ones that have the most value and the highest prices, most likely, since they're going to be the cards that everyone has to have when they square up in tournaments. While some meta-relevant cards last a bunch of formats, some burn out quickly because of the ban list. And because the ban list can neuter a deck or a specific series of cards, the price can fluctuate wildly because cards on the ban list could potentially become less relevant or completely irrelevant, since a deck can become unplayable because of one card being hit. And if a card is irrelevant in the meta, it retains next to no value, since Yu-Gi-Oh! Card value and prices depend on Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament relevancy, which is largely dictated by the ban list. So my stock example of this are decks such as Thunder Dragons, which they went from being one of the top tier decks and one of the most expensive decks to being not worth that much after a ban list that banned Thunder Dragon Colossus. And you could even say the same about Trickstars. However, you do have the rare occasion that an older relevant card becomes sought after. This scenario happens when a new card comes out and exploits a old card's effect, which makes the card broken. And a recent example of this would be Smoke Grenade of the Thief, since Infernobles could take advantage of the equip spell mechanic and could exploit Smoke Grenade's effect through Infernobles' destruction effect. But all in all, Yu-Gi-Oh! Card prices do unfortunately depend on the ban list, and it's a reality that you do face in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So the next issue has to do with the reprint problem. And the reprint controversy has been attributed to a lot of the card value and price alterations that a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players complain about, since current expensive staple meta cards do not currently receive a lot of reprints, which artificially keeps these ridiculously expensive cards at their astronomical prices. And that's been one of the common complaints by Yu-Gi-Oh! Players. And on the other hand, there's the issue where once expensive cards receive so many reprints that it drives down the price so low that they're only worth a couple of bucks after the entire thing's done with. So this also happens with cards that should be priced a bit above average, but they're reprinted so much that they're worth almost nothing. Cards that normally receive this treatment are cards that have just been past their prime and are very soon going to be phased out by the power creep, or they're not going to be as useful as much in the meta as they once were. Cards like S39 Utopia the Lightning and Borolo Dragon are prime examples of this phenomena. These once hyper expensive cards are now, as of the time of this video, only worth $1 or a couple of dollars. But the point is that these cards' values drop so drastically that it does diminish the idea behind investing in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! Since it does feel like your purchased card doesn't hold a lot of long-term value, especially after initially spending tons of money on these briefly expensive cards. Luckily, it isn't that bad as it once was, but this issue used to be so profound that me and a friend would joke about the most expensive cards of the day, typically the newest release cards of the day, and we would joke that the cards would be as cheap as toilet paper by the end of the month. Although a bit of an exaggeration, this wasn't too far off the mark, since we often made this joke back in 2011 when Tour Guide and Tour Bus of the Underworld were expensive, and I would consider this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! To be the beginning of when Yu-Gi-Oh! Card value issues really started to get out of hand, and especially later on in Wind-Up Inzektor format. This phenomena got so bad that you could even apply this concept to whole decks. If decks didn't get devalued by the ban list, they were usually reprinted into the ground. And because of it, people who invested in decks that were worth hundreds of dollars were then feeling a great degree of buyer's remorse, since their investment and deck was only now worth a couple of bucks. So this next issue is a bit of a mix between the ban list issue and the reprint issue. And the issue is that the ban list and the reprint issue are the main culprits behind Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards not retaining a lot of their value. And many Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards don't have much collector's value because of it. The few old Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that have any sort of collector's value are the old-time favorites, such as Blue Eyes Exodia, Dark Magician, and Red Eyes Black Dragon. Yes, these cards were once relevant, but they were primarily marketed as the classic fan favorite mascot cards that stood as the figureheads of Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the game's conception. And they were the cards that you wanted to have because they were cards that you often thought of when you thought of Yu-Gi-Oh! And these cards weren't meant to be unbelievably competitive. They were meant to be those classic cards that had unique artwork and designs that made you want to sleeve them up or get them PSA graded and basically put them on a nice mantle or a nice shelf out for display basically. And that's what their primary purpose was. They had collector's value in mind. But even then, these classic old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards aren't nearly worth as much as they should be. Most of the original cards are only worth a couple of $100, and some are worth less than $100. There are only a few that just go into the 1,000 marks, but their value only really goes into the 1,000 mark when they're PSA graded, which I think is a huge problem since these are almost 20-year-old cards that should be worth thousands regardless of whether they're PSA graded. As a comparison, Magic the Gathering has plenty of cards currently worth thousands, and there are classic cards that are worth hundreds of thousands. I know Magic has been around longer, but more Magic cards from 10 years ago retain far more value than Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards from 10 years ago. And that's the problem with most modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. They're not marketed like the original classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. Modern day cards are shoveled out by the bulk and hold little collector's value because of the non-existent classic marketing, and because Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are marketed to be more meta-competitive. And since they're marketed as meta-competitive, they not only lose tons of value once they fall from the meta's grace, but they haven't built any collector's value since they're mass-produced cards that aren't very memorable, and they haven't really branded themselves like the classic cards. And I've even noticed that some of the newer cards are even more flimsy than the old school cards. I've noticed actual physical, less material made when these cards are printed. They're a lot thinner and you can really see through them when you put them up against the light. And so despite some Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards holding considerable amount of value, you don't really see too many of them holding significant amounts of value for too long. So how do we fix the problem? The first method would be to limit the amount of set releases. And I say this because Magic the Gathering has had a system where they choose when they will release their main sets and when they will release their side sets. And this system has allowed them to have profound control over which cards release during each format, which helps them control the power creep and ultimately helps them prevent cards from becoming irrelevant in a shorter amount of time. Konami's problem is that they seem to crank out product as fast as they possibly can, which means that there are newer and better cards coming out much more quickly, and in turn it makes these cards become more irrelevant and even more irrelevant at a faster pace in the meta, which ultimately depreciates their value. Limited releases also allows Konami to better think out their card design ideas, and it will also allow them to create more memorable cards like Dark Magician or Blue Eyes White Dragon, since they're not just shoveling out poorly thought out cards with potentially broken effects that increase the power creep or have poorly thought out art design / they're forgettable cards in general. So the idea here is quality over quantity. The next solution kind of relates to the solution I just gave, but it has to do with releasing sets that have unique value to them. So what I mean is that Konami should release sets with specific rarities that will never be printed again or will be printed sparingly. Rarities like Ghost Rares and Ultimate Rares have helped cards retain more long-term value, but I think that unique rares will allow certain card prints to retain more collector's value. And I don't mean print some super holographic card, I mean Konami could print a set that has incredibly detailed artwork or hyper-realistic art designs for cards. Magic the Gathering kind of has this already, since an incredible amount of detail goes into the art, which makes them look like mini Renaissance paintings. Adding details like this will definitely lead to a lot more long-term card value. They could even throw in exclusive sleeves or card protectors that look like fancy portrait frames, or even look like the ancient Egyptian tablets, like in the original Yu-Gi-Oh anime. Heck, they've already kinda done this with the OCG Prismatic Rare Egyptian God boxes, so why not double down on this idea for the TCG? Luckily, Konami has kinda dabbled with this idea in their recent Maximum Gold Rare set, since the gold foiling kinda looked like it was raised on the card surface, and I personally think that the Maximum Gold rarity is a good start for long-term Yu-Gi-Oh card value, since it's a unique spin on the gold rare foiling in general, and these cards will likely accrue value if Konami doesn't overprint the same reprints in the future within the same foiling. So, cards like Blue Eyes White Dragon are already worth quite a bit, and they will likely grow in value because of their Maximum Gold rarity alone, and especially because it's a fan favorite old school legacy card. And I think if Konami creates a set with one kind of unique art, I think Yu-Gi-Oh players will be more satisfied in the long-term investment value and collector's value of their Yu-Gi-Oh card purchase choices. And the last solution is the most extreme but effective solution for the value problem, and it involves Konami creating a set rotation. If Konami creates a set rotation like Magic the Gathering, where they rotate cards every 2 years out of the format and into another format, this would definitely keep many cards relevant for years to come, and it would even make cards from the very beginning of the game become relevant once again, since certain cards can now only be used in specific formats. This would mainly work if the formats were broken into a vintage format, standard format, and modern formats, and each format will only be allowed to use specific cards within a selected Yu-Gi-Oh generation. And while I do think this would instantly make irrelevant cards become very valuable in their respective format, I think this is something I would really hate to see in Yu-Gi-Oh, since Yu-Gi-Oh's strength is that it's one uniform card game that you can play with anyone without having to figure out which format they're trying to play. And this is only really a nuclear option if Yu-Gi-Oh really gets out of hand and just needs a hard reset. The closest thing I would like to see that is familiar to a set rotation is seeing Konami implement tag team formats in Yu-Gi-Oh! And maybe even traditional format, but no one really even knows what that is anymore. But yeah, that's pretty much been my take on this whole issue. And I guess this is an issue that's been pretty much for the most part on Yu-Gi-Oh! I can't really say it's been around since the very beginning, but it's been around for a long time in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I really do think if Konami can take ideas such as these into consideration, I think it would really give people more incentive to invest and pretty much stay in Yu-Gi-Oh! In general, instead of being kind of embittered by this whole kind of card value depreciation issue. And I really do think Konami can prosper with this. But let me know what techniques or I guess ideas Konami can use to kind of, I guess, improve this situation and make Yu-Gi-Oh cards a little more valuable. If you would like to support more content like this in the future, you can do so at my Necromancer 1040 Patreon link down below. I normally post it in the description, and you can check it there along with the other cool things I normally post down below. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next one. Alright, take care.